when the initial voting showed that 85% of the audience thought genetics would play a critical role in advancing Alzheimer's disease. I debated the opposite, that it would not play a critical role. And the central argument I made was that what we've learned from the genetics, aside from the issue of apolipoprotein E, you could have known with the first description of the disease by Alzheimer in 1906. The genetics has provided no additional information. It's provided that amyloid is important, neurofibrillary tangles are important, and inflammation is important. Beyond that, genetics has provided nothing else. It's provided no new therapeutics, and the central argument I made on that is that genetics itself is not a way to understand causality. It's a way to know association. Causality has to be determined by carefully executed clinical studies or interruption of processes, etc. And all of those have shown that the genetic components of Alzheimer's disease are not causative. They play critical roles. I made the argument that you could make it, the argument that the genetics is no different than knowing that the rooster crows at sunrise and the sun comes up, and it always happens. But this rooster, if you change the rooster to crow an hour earlier, the sun doesn't come up an hour earlier. It isn't what drives the sun. It's associated with it. Well, the genetics for Alzheimer's disease is more clearly involved in the process, but it doesn't have to be the initiating factor. And in fact, our own experiments indicate it's probably a protective factor, very much like many of these factors are very much like inflammation. And that is that they're part of a multi-step process involved in the aging process. And further, why is this as confusion for human disease is because most of our concepts are derived from juvenile diseases or acute diseases of defect. And Alzheimer's is not a disease of defect. In other words, you don't have to have a mutation in order to have it. You can be when you have a disease that potentially affects 60% of the population if they live to an advanced age, it's not a disease of having mutations. It's a disease like heart disease is, like many other age-related diseases. And the genetics only tells you a small thing. The third part was that it's unlikely, in fact, not even possible, that any new factors will be disclosed from further genetic analysis, because the important ones in terms of populations have already been found. So what's likely is you'll find factors to play really small roles in the disease. And what is the chance that those are going to provide something beyond the issue of biomarkers for genetic profiling, which was shown by the person I was debating? He made the point that it could be used for profiling. Yes, but the reality is almost nobody's using it for this purpose. The really important genetic factor, apolipoprotein E, which plays a major role in your risk of having Alzheimer's disease, I don't know that is prominently being tested in most people. So if it's not tested, what are the chance things that have really low penetrance? And the determinant mutations, the presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and amyloid precursor protein have very early onset. So those families that contain those mutations already know that they have the condition. It wouldn't be a surprise for them. So I don't see where it's going to inform them. Further, even in those cases, the few trials of amyloid removal have not benefited the patients. There were 2 published, and both of them, the patients got worse, which is what we predict, because we think that all of these genetically involved factors in the disease are playing this protective function. After I made my presentation, 38%, so I still didn't have a majority, but I over doubled my support, 2.5 times as much support for my view as opposed to the other.